Thanks for checking out the weekly sermon from Church of the Resurrection. I pray that God will use this message to speak to you and help you grow in your faith journey. If you're in the KC area, I'd like to invite you to join us next week at one of our services, or join us in live worship online at core.org/worship. Church of the Resurrection is one church in multiple locations. To learn more about the service times in our ministries, please visit core.org. Hope you enjoy this week's message.
As we continue in worship, I invite you to hear these words of Scripture from the Gospel according to Matthew. You should treat people in the same way that you want people to treat you. This is the law and the prophets. And in the Gospel of Mark, we hear Jesus' words as he quotes from Leviticus. You will love your neighbor as yourself. And in Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, we read, don't do anything for selfish purposes, but with humility, think of others as better than yourselves. Instead of each person watching out for their own good, watch out for what is better for others. May God add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the living of these words.
Hey, it's Kelly Ray Sunshine here. Who's ready to play?
I'm ready, Kelly Ray.
I know you are, beautiful Bill, and so are Adam and Levon. You're going to have the chance to get a coveted key to one of these doors. And when you open it, you will find out how to make your love last a lifetime.
Oh, can it be any better than it already is?
It can't. And so I'd like you to take this chance to pick a door.
I think door number 2 or 3. No, I like door number 3. No, well, what about 4 and 5? There's
just wants one answer.
I can't pick just one. There's truths behind all of them. I want all of them.
Okay, we choose number 2.
All right, amen. Let's pick number 2.
Wait. But what about number 5? Number 5 probably has the most important truth. Could we get 2 and 5?
All right, Bill, door number 2. You can only have one door.
All right. The sermon starter, if you weren't here last week, is tongue-in-cheek. It's meant to model, a 1970s game show, and as a way of saying, okay, we're taking a serious topic, but we got to have a little humor as we take this serious topic on. We're trying to figure out what are the keys to making relationships last a lifetime, and we're not just talking about marital and romantic relationships. That's our focus, but the keys are really key to every meaningful relationship in our lives. And on Mother's Day weekend, I'm going to tell you, the keys that we're going to talk about today are true in our relationship with our parents and our children and our family members. You practice these things, all of those relationships will be better. So I want to begin, though, and recognize I was a teenager in the 70s, so in the late 70s anyway. I was in high school, and I never wore anything like that. Take a look at this outfit here. So we had to actually go rent this from a costume store, and I want you to notice the shoes there. So go into the shoes. There we go. I've never worn a pair of platform shoes in my life, but it was kind of fun hamming this up. And later in the message, you'll see one last shot of Levon and I as we were dancing there in the studio. All right, so I want to begin by recognizing that this is not rocket science to have relationships that are better, to improve relationships, but it takes hard work. And today we're going to come to the second of our 5 keys. So the first one was have a clear MVP, a mission, a vision, and a plan for your relationships. Today, it's make more deposits than withdrawals. Make more deposits than withdrawals. And so we're going to try to figure out what does that mean. And as we think about that, I want to start with a little bit of data. So, and we're going to actually share a lot of data with you today, but we did a survey as a congregation, and over the last few weeks, now 10,103 people have taken this relationship survey. Most of them members of Church of the Resurrection or regular worshipers on TV, online here in Kansas City. It's the single largest survey of United Methodists that's probably ever been done on relationships. Largest survey probably in the last 3 or 4 years, and one of the largest in the last 10 years. We have some great data. And what I love about this is what I'm going to share with you is not data from people in California or Calgary or New York City. This is your data. You actually answer this. This is your data. So you're going to be learning some things today about ourselves, about us, and what it takes to make more withdrawals than deposits. All right, so I thought it'd be interesting just to start by showing you a little bit of data about who's very happily married. So we asked people, are you very happily married? Are you somewhat happily married? Are you not very happily married? Are you miserable in your relationship? Here's what we found. Based upon the years that people have been married, those who've been married under 5 years, 55% were very happy in their relationships. But something happens around year 5, and that begins to drop significantly. So it drops more than 20% to 42% of people years 5 to 9 who are married were very happy. Look what happens years 15 to 19. Only 34%, only a third of our people who took the survey were very happy in their marriages in years 15 to 19. Then you begin to see an increase in years 20 to 24, a little bit of a blip somewhere around 25 to 29, and then you begin to see this really take off. And I want you to notice the people who had been married more than 40 years were happier than the newlyweds. And so that's an exciting thing to see. Why is this? Why is it that we find marital happiness drops precipitously? It actually ends up dropping, about 40%. The number of people say they're very happily married between the newlywed stage and by the time they've been married around 19 years. And you know the answer to that. It actually begins dropping at years 5. What begins happening in most marriages around year 5? Well, people start having babies. They have children. And then they have another child. And then maybe they have another child. And then you have these years where they're little, and then they're in elementary school, and then they're in middle school and high school. And it's not that that's bad. Families will say, people have kids, they're like, this is really such a meaningful and joyful part of our lives, but it's hard. And then what happens during that period of time is we're focusing our attention, as I talked about last week in the sermon, on our children, and we're not doing the things that we did when we first fell in love with each other. And so just to give you some sense of that, let me take a look at this data here. This is couples who go out on a date at least twice monthly by age. So those who are under 30 went out 45%, 45% of them went out twice monthly on dates. By the time you get to your 30s, only 15% went on dates twice monthly. Why is that? Because you start having kids and they have school things and soccer things, and it seems like there's no more time for you to be able to do this with each other. Only 15% of people married people in this age group went out on dates at least twice a month. And that begins to change as the kids begin to get a little bit older, and then they don't want to hang around with their parents. And then pretty soon they've moved out, and then all of a sudden, the dating life goes up, and so we're dating more in our 70s than we were in our 20s. And marital satisfaction goes up. I mean, this is just one little piece of data. I'm going to share a lot more like that in the last sermon in the series. How do you make this thing work for a lifetime? But here's one. You go out on dates. Listen carefully. The best thing you can do for your kids, one of them anyway, is to take your mate out on dates regularly. And it seems hard. You got to get a babysitter. And it seems, you're taking time away from your kids. But if you are more in love with each other and you have solidified and you help strengthen your relationship, you're going to find that you're better parents. They have a better model for what it means to be married. It's important that we continue to romance one another. All right, they call this data, and it shows up in every single survey we've done over the last 25 years. It shows up in surveys across the country, not just ours, secular people too. They call it the U-curve, and that U-curve is just a classic. That you start having children and you begin to see the number of people who are very happy in their marriages declines. You find fragility comes into their relationships. They become much more fragile during this period of time. Things we don't want to have happen during this period of time because we're not devoting time for each other. There's a whole lot of other things that are going to take place during this period. We're going to talk about those in a couple of weeks. Here's what I want you to know, again, is if you looked at that U-curve, you come out of it. So you reach a low point, when the kids, they're, in middle school or elementary school, middle school, and high school. And if you remember that, the fact that people end up moving out of that and they become happier and happier and happier after those years in their marriage and their marital relationship, this is what happens. And so you find when you think about giving up and throwing in the towel, right there when it's at a low point, you miss out on the fact that there's joy that's coming. The relationship's going to get better when you do the right kinds of things and you're devoting more time to one another. I want you to have hope, because often I talk to couples who are in their 30s. They see this data, in their late 20s and their 30s. They see this data and they say, I thought I was the only one. We thought we were the only ones who were struggling during this period of time. It's like, no, you're normal. This is normal. It's just hard during that period of time to balance all of these things. But if you can start working on that, if you know that, it gives you the knowledge to say, we're going to hang in there and we're going to start working on these things that will actually help us. So I just want you to be encouraged if you're struggling a little bit in that period in your relationship. And by the way, Dr. Fauci talked about flattening the curve when it came to COVID. When it comes to marital relationships, I'm hoping that the series will help you flatten the curve. That is to not see that dip so much when you know the reasons for that and you can address that. So we're going to talk about a lot more of these things in the weeks to come. All right, so that leads us to talk about the love bank. In 1986, there was a therapist named Willard Harley. He wrote a book called His Needs, Her Needs, Building an Affair-Proof Marriage. And in it, he came up with this theory or this idea of the love bank. So the love bank, if you think about your bank, your ATM, and they look something like this, an ATM, and this is an ATM that's a love bank. So you got on the screen the heart, and you think about it, in your regular bank, you make deposits and you make withdrawals. And the goal is to make sure you always have more money than you're taking out, right? And if you end up taking out more money than you have in the account, then what you eventually get is a notice that you're in overdraft mode. And what Harley said is the same thing is true with this metaphor works of the love bank for our hearts, that we all need to have deposits. We need to have affirmation. We need to have love. We need to feel, our hearts, lifted up and full. And so we need deposits. And that's true, parents for their children. It's true in adult children for their parents and all kinds of relationships in the workplace. It's the same. If you are an employer, you're a boss or a supervisor, and you are only taking from your employees and you're not pouring back into them, you're not blessing them or finding ways to encourage them or helping them feel satisfied and gratified in their work, they're not going to work there forever, because at some point you feel just discouraged. You feel in overdraft mode every day you go to the office. Now, all of us are going to feel that way sometimes at work and in other places in our relationships. But here's what we want to know. If I'm aware of that, if I'm thinking about your love bank, and in romantic relationships, really important, and I'm making deposits, more deposits than withdrawals, I'm going to find our relationship will last. And so I was thinking the other day about communication, and there was a married couple I met, and they said, I said, tell me how you met. And they were telling me, the first time we went on a date, we spent 8 hours. We went there and we closed the restaurant and bar down. We were there for 8 hours talking. And what I know is they give them 20 years and they won't talk 8 hours in a month. And so, we begin to not do the things that we did at first. And we find that ends up being detrimental. If that's a deposit, talking and sharing your feelings, then not doing that constitutes a withdrawal. Now, there are withdrawals that are happening ordinarily in life. Your bank account, that's meant to not just put money in, but you take money out as well. And so daily living is withdrawals. I mean, we're going to, somebody's got to clean the house, and somebody's got to prepare the food, and somebody's got to take care of the children, and somebody's got to mow the yard. And all of these things are things we don't necessarily want to do, but we do. And that requires energy. It requires us giving something, for the other people, for the family. But if we're not having deposits put in over a long period of time, that kind of ordinary stuff will lead us into a place where our account is overdrawn. But in addition to that, we find that we sometimes say things or do things or fail to say or do things that actually harm our significant other. And so, when we've gotten harsh, when we've gotten angry, when we've lashed out, all of those things, when we're intentionally not meeting the needs of the other person or doing something that's hurtful, we find that we go into overdraft mode really fast. And so when that happens, I know in my family what that looks like is I can tell in LaVon's eyes, I'm in overdraft status. I can hear it in her tone of voice. I can feel it in the silent treatment or whatever it is. And she can feel it from me when she's in overdraft status with me. It sort of looks like this picture you see on the screen of this couple. And this is overdraft mode. And I know every one of you who's been in any kind of significant relationship knows what overdraft mode feels like. And so the key thing is to try to figure out, how do we go about making deposits and not withdrawals in our loved one's love bank? And for that to happen, we need to figure out what constitutes a deposit in their love bank. Or I think about Gary Chapman used the metaphor of a love tank, like a fuel tank on your car. And you put the wrong kind of fuel in a car. So if you put diesel fuel in a car that requires regular, or vice versa, you're going to find the car is not going to start. It's not going to run. Sometimes you can even mess up the engine because you put the wrong kind of fuel in. So you need to know what constitutes a deposit. What's the kind of fuel that this person takes? Or, we talked about love languages. So this is one thing Gary Chapman wrote a book about years ago, and love languages. And what he notes is that we have different love languages. So I speak love in one way, but LaVon may be speaking love in another way. She might be trying to show love to me, but if it's not the language that I speak when it comes to love, I'm not feeling it as love. I'm feeling like she doesn't understand me, and vice versa. And so we're like two people talking two totally different languages. So this week, I want to encourage you, and in the GPS, you're going to find the information where to access this, but to take one of these surveys to find out what your love language is, or love languages are. So, I took one of those surveys this week, and I just wanted to show you this. This is my love languages. So Gary Chapman talks about there's quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts. You can take the survey for free. It doesn't cost anything to do it. But what I learned on mine is that, 30% of my love language is quality time, and 27% is physical touch, and 20% is words of affirmation. Receiving gifts is a little lower for me. Acts of service is down here. You might find that there's one clear leader, and you might find that your spouse has one clear leader. Or if you're dating, find out what they are for the two of you. Listen, this works for your mom. If your mom's alive, have her take the test. Find out what her love language is. You might just find that you've been showing the wrong love language to your mom all of these years, and she was really waiting for you to do something else. So what happens when we're armed with this information, or when we have kids, to know what their love languages are, and we can begin to make deposits instead of withdrawals? All right, so I want to share with you the data from our congregation, on what constitutes a withdrawal, and then we'll talk about what looks like a deposit. So I'm going to start with singles. We had 2,000 single people who took the survey, more than 2,000 single people who took the survey, and we asked them, which attributes do you find most undesirable in a potential partner or spouse? It's kind of good to know this information. So in essence, they're saying, if I see this on a date, I'm not going on a second date with this person. So negativity, 55% find that, something undesirable. 52%, these are withdrawals when they see this in a dating relationship. Bad habits, 43%. So closed-minded, bad habits, arrogance and bragging, not listening or inattentive. And these guys are saying, yeah, that's kind of a deal killer for me. And women, very similar. 55% of our women said closed-minded. Now, not every church and not every place you'd find this would be the number one response. But around here, people are saying, I don't want to be around somebody who's closed-minded and judgmental. And 54% bad habits, over-drinking, smoking, these kind of things. 46% arrogance and bragging. 45% negativity. 43% not listening and inattentive. Now, this isn't just for single people to know what other folks find a turnoff. I want to know this as a married person. And I want to know what they're interested in too, what they're looking for, because the thing is, I want to be the kind of person that if LaVon wasn't already married to me, she would want to be married to me, or she'd want to be in a relationship with me. I want to be that person. And so it helps me to know what other people, single people are saying in terms of what turns them off and what turns them on. I want to know that information, and I want to take note of it. I want to be the kind of person LaVon would marry if she were not married already. So then I want to take a look at the next set of data, and this has to do with married people. And so let's take a look at this. When we asked married folks, and again, there was over 7,000 people responded to this question, which characteristics or activities do you find most irritating, frustrating, or leave you feeling far from your mate? So these are married men, disinterested in physical intimacy. So I'm frustrated in my marriage when this is the response, or when somebody's nagging at me, or negative, or overreacting, or critical of me, or not listening to me. Right, so this is good to note. It's good to remember, okay, this constitutes a withdrawal. Every time I'm doing one of these things, it doesn't mean that you're going to ever, none of us are going to stop doing all these things, but we're going to work on this because it constitutes a withdrawal. For women, not listening to me. So guys, when you're on your phone or you're looking at the game and you're not paying attention, that's a withdrawal right there. Failing to share your thoughts or feelings, short temper and impatience. Again, for men, negativity. Failing to help around the house, poor response to crisis or difficulty. So all of these constitute withdrawals for at least some people. Yours may not be on that list, which is why you want to have a conversation with your mate and say, hey, what constitutes, and it's hard because when they say this, you feel defensive, like, suddenly you're trying to protect yourself. But listen, in love, if you all can say at some time when you're having a great conversation, hey, tell me, what are the things that constitute a withdrawal for you? And listen. And pay attention. And here's one really good piece of marital advice. It's just so simple. Remember, I've told you it's not rocket science. It's just intentionality and sometimes hard work. But here it is. The stuff that's on the list that frustrates, that irritates, that constitutes withdrawal, do less of that. Do less of that. And when you do less of that, then you don't need to make overwhelming deposits to make up for, to compensate for all the withdrawals you've had, and you find yourself less often in overdraft status. It's not rocket science, it's not that hard, but we do have to be willing to listen, pay attention, to find out, what our significant others find irritating, frustrating, or undesirable. All right, so let's take a look then at what constitutes a deposit. Oh, by the way, this is interesting. This is the data that I just shared with you, but it's broken down by age group. And so you can see on these bar charts, and you can see down below, these are people under 30, 30 to 39, 40, 49, 50, 59, 60 to 69, 70 up. This is men. And so I want you to notice something interesting. This disinterest in physical or sexual intimacy, it starts rising, when we get into the 30s. What happened again in the 30s? We started having children. So suddenly this area of our life is also struggling a little bit. We get to the 40s and it reaches a pinnacle, a peak, which is why this is a very dangerous time for many marriages. And then we find that the kids move out and this seems to increase our physical intimacy, our touch, all of these things. And levels off a little bit, but continues to go down. And so by the time we're in the 70s, part of what we find is that we're dancing together. Our interest, our desires, the frequency, we end up matching up or lining up there. And so I just think that's really hopeful. You don't want to give up. So look on this chart again. You don't want to give up when you get to this point right here. Don't give up when you're here. All right, you can keep working on this. And then you see these other things here. Most of them stay pretty close to the same. They all, end up in about the same place when you've been married 70 years or up. But here's the second one that we find is nagging. Again, happens in the 30s. A lot of stuff going on in families during this period of time. So you can kind of see how this plays out. Let's take a look at women. And which characteristics or activities do you find most irritating, frustrating, or leave you feeling far from your mate? Look over here. In the 30s, right over here, we're at failing to help around the house. So we've started having children, or maybe we haven't, and we're getting into bad habits. But look what happens over time is we find that our mates start, hopefully that's what's being said here, is that our mates start helping out, we start sharing in our responsibilities, or it's possible that, sometimes we just go, look, that's how they are, I'm not gonna be able to change them. But hopefully that actually signifies something hopeful that things begin to change here. But also notice that this line right here is not listening to me. And so in the 30s, maybe we're doing a little more listening down here, but suddenly when we get to the 60s, we find that we're not listening nearly as much as we used to listen. And so that's something to pay attention to recognize that constitutes a withdrawal. Also, the negativity begins to rise over here. And so being careful about not becoming that negative person. One thing that we know about communication, I mentioned already that, when we're dating to begin with and we're listening to the other person, we're texting each other, we're talking, there was a study that was done out of Great Britain some years ago. They found that couples, when they were first married, they studied how long did they talk to each other during an hour-long meal. And when they first got married, it was 50 minutes of an hour-long meal where they were conversing with each other, actively conversing with each other, listening, talking. By the time they got, I think it was into their 60s, what they found is that had been reduced to somewhere around 15 minutes or less of active listening and talking during a 1-hour meal. So somewhere, and you've seen this, you've seen people sitting in restaurants who've been married a long time and they're texting, instead of talking to each other in the restaurant or, on dates or, whatever. You find we stop learning how to have conversations with each other anymore. All right, so these are things that we can be aware of. I want us to take a look now at what happens with our married relationships when we're asking, what does your mate do that makes you feel closest to them? So men's responses, 51% of men said, I feel closest to my mate when they demonstrate affection. That's a kiss, that's a hug, that's a hand holding. It's separate from physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, but it's similar to that. When they have fun with me, I feel close to them when they're having fun with me. When they share their thoughts and feelings, physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, I feel closest to them then. 33% when they're listening to me. Women, when he shares his thoughts and feelings with me, or when my partner shares his thoughts and feelings with me. When they listen to me. When they have fun with me, when they demonstrate affection, when they provide a sense of security. So there's some here, this was not on the woman's list of the top 5. It was on the list, it was down the road. Providing a sense of security was not on the men's top list. All right, let's take a look at this and what happens over time. Women, what do you wish your mate would do more frequently? So the number one here, in this period of time and when there are kids at home, plan a romantic evening. This isn't, again, rocket science, and it's not that hard, but you got to be intentional about it. They're saying, please, this is what I need right now, is for you to plan a romantic evening. But look, that falls way down here, as you get older, because you're spending a lot more time together. All right, and then, as you look at a couple of these other ones, you find sharing thoughts and feelings. Well, again, we learn in the 60s, that ends up being a serious issue. It becomes, more serious for the woman. I want you to talk to me. I want you to share your thoughts and feelings with me. I want you to listen to me right over here. And so those have gone way up. Let's take a look at what men said. So again, we start seeing a dramatic change in the 30s, a huge rise in the number of men who were saying, I wish we had more physical intimacy, more sexual intimacy. And that peaks at this point for men in the 40s. And so again, as I mentioned, that's a dangerous time. But look what happens. It begins that, we begin to see a dramatic change here until you finally get over here and you find, we're dancing together, as we've already learned. Okay, I want you to notice two other things. Demonstrating affection, same thing. So we find, this is something the men who had been married, who are aged 40 to 49, they're saying, I really wish we had more affection. But I want you to notice, I love this. What I wish my wife would do more of, or my spouse would do more of, is you get here to the 40s and 49, and then look what goes up. It's this blue line, and you know what that is? Nothing. My mate does all of these things just about right. Don't you love that? And I'd like for LaVon to be able to say that about me. I feel like I say that about her. She's, somebody once said they'd been married more than 50 years. We said, so, what would you change about your mate? And they said, nothing. After 50 years, I've got him just about the way I want him. And that, I think, is part of what happens here. All right. So as we think about this, by the way, I think I have one more slide here, and that is, of all the single adults, which attributes do you most desire in a potential partner or spouse? So again, this is important for all of us, married people too, to know this is what, if you weren't married right now, this is what your current mate would want in you. 63%, I want somebody who's honest and trustworthy. 74% of women, honest and trustworthy. I mean, dishonesty is a deal killer in a relationship. 50% emotionally stable, men said. 47% women said humorous and funny. Strong faith from men is number 3. That's surprising that men had it so high. Women, strong faith, number 4. Good communicator here. Emotionally stable, compassion. So humorous and fun, physically attractive, intelligent. Right? These are the things that our single people told us were important to them. All right, so again, to the degree that we can, if we know what constitutes a deposit, really simple marital advice, do more of what constitutes a deposit. Be more of the kind of spouse that your spouse would want to marry if they weren't already married to you. Let's work on this. It's not rocket science. We can do this. We can make this better. All right, so that leads me to the scriptures, because every one of these things we're talking about are not simply things that modern day marriage therapists have figured out. These are things that people have always known. They've figured this out. And in Scripture, we find some basic fundamental scriptural principles that lead us to these same conclusions. So Leviticus 19:18, Moses offers this. Jesus quotes it as the second great commandment. I want you to read it with me. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, the love there is agape. It's selflessness, it's sacrifice, it's giving and blessing. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. What happens when you look at your mate or the person you're dating as your neighbor? Or your mom or your kids or the rest of your family. But here in this romantic, in this romantic relationship, what happens when I say, I want to love you as I love myself? And then Jesus also says that the law and the prophets can be summarized by the golden rule. You remember what it says? Let's read it together. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, this is largely what we've been talking about, but I will tell you that, and I'm not trying to improve upon Jesus and Moses, I wouldn't dare do that, but I can say that I think this needs to be a little bit tweaked when it comes to our relationships, our intimate relationships. And so I would say in those relationships, we might actually say something like this: do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So that means finding out what is their love language, what do they need? And then the second is love your neighbor as they long to be loved, right? You got to speak their love language. So in essence, what we've been saying is you got to know the kind of currency that their bank needs. If I'm paying in pesos, but you only take dollars, I'm not really offering, I'm not really filling up your love bank. Or likewise, if you don't understand what kind of fuel their love tank needs, then you're in trouble. And if you're not understanding their love language, you're speaking languages that are very different from your own. All right, so Paul captures this also in Philippians chapter 2. And I love this passage. He says, don't do anything for selfish purposes. Sometimes we can even do kind things to other people because we just want our needs met, as opposed to trying to earnestly meet their needs. Don't do anything for selfish purposes, but with humility, think of others as better than yourselves. Instead of each person watching out for their own good, watch out for what is better for others. That's learning their love language. What's better for you? It's not what's better for me, what's better for you? What is it you need? What is it you love? What is it you long for? What is it that turns you off and what turns you on? I mean, how can I bless you? Right, which goes back to what we learned last week. The mission of marriage, the mission of romantic relationships is to help the other person, to bless them, to care for them, to build them up, to encourage them. All right. Last week I mentioned that Kathy Bean, one of our staff members here, our director of communications, came to our home and interviewed LaVon and me. And the real goal for me was to interview LaVon. I wanted you to be able to hear from her. And so one of the questions was simply, LaVon, what is it that constitutes a withdrawal on Adam's part? And so as we talked about that, I will tell you, you're only going to get to hear about a minute and 10 seconds of it. There was about 10 minutes worth of stuff she mentioned, and always with a bit of humor, but places where I make withdrawals from and have over the last 40 years of our marriage. But here's what she said. Take a listen.
I know many of you out there may think that Adam is perfect, but he is far from it. And the thing that it really irritates me is he never picks anything up. I mean, things will get set down and that's where they stay. And so I kind of shuffle things together and make a stack, and then the stack grows and it grows and it grows, and then that lasts for so long, and I ask him to pick it up and he doesn't get picked up, and finally I will just move the stack. Another thing that irritates me, that really gets to me, is the fact that we have a 4-bedroom house. He has an office, complete office to himself in the basement. But Adam chooses to work on his sermons in my space, right here at the kitchen table in the middle of the house, where he's on the phone. You got to be quiet. He's doing a Zoom call. I can't walk by. He's got plenty of spaces to work. This is mine.
Why do I do that? I don't. The view is better out these windows. I don't like being in the basement. I enjoy it, so I'm close to the food. Here, if I'm working on my sermon here at the kitchen table, I like to be close to you, honey.
Well, that's just one example of many, or two examples, I think, of many, many things that I have done that constitute withdrawals. But I will tell you, there were some that were much more serious than that. So 25 years ago, LaVon and I, leading this church, we lived right behind the church. We were in the midst of a capital campaign. I was gone every night for, I think, 2 weeks. And at that point, I was working 75 or 80 hours a week many times. And after about a week and a half of this, she said, this is not okay. I didn't sign on for this. I'm every night here with the kids. You're not here to help put them to bed. You're not here for dinner. This is just not okay. And I could tell, by her voice and the look in her eyes, I was in overdraft mode. And I was in overdraft status. And anyway, I said, okay, I'll tell you what. On Thursday night, it's a finance committee meeting. I only have to be there for the first little bit of it. I promise you I'll be home. I'll make some corrections. I'm going to change this. I realize that what's going on. I don't want this to happen. And she said, okay, so I'll make dinner. You're going to be here what time? I said 7:30. So I went to the finance committee meeting that night. I'm sitting there in the meeting. We're talking about the capital campaign and how things were coming in and what we were doing and what needed to be cut from the building and all these kind of things. And I look at my watch and it's 7:30, but we're in the middle of a really heated conversation about what we were going to do, really critical. I felt like I had to be there, and we didn't have cell phones back then. And so I had no way to call her or text her. 7:30 to 8 o'clock, 8:30, 8:40. I finally step out of the meeting. I come home. By the time I get home, it's about 9 o'clock. I walked home and all the lights were off in the house. She'd put the kids to get to bed early, right after 8 o'clock. She was so upset. And I walked in the house, started turning on lights. I walked upstairs to our bedroom and the doors were locked to the bedroom. And I looked down and my pillow was sitting outside the bedroom and outside the door. And I said, LaVon, I'm so sorry. I'm really so sorry. She said, I know you're sorry. You're always sorry. But sorry's not going to cut it. There's got to be some changes happening around here. This is just not okay. And then she opened the door and she asked me this question. She said, tell me, how would you feel if the shoe was on the other foot? How would you feel if I was she works at Johnson County Community College. How would you feel if I was gone every night for 2 weeks? How would you feel if you were here all by yourself with the kids? How would you feel if I was working 80 hours a week and you were not, you were waiting for me to come home? And it was interesting, here I was a pastor, but I'd never thought about do unto others as you'd have them do unto you as it applied to my wife, the one person that mattered most to me. And it changed how I thought about things and has ever since, as I've tried to think, how would it feel if what I'm doing, she was doing to me? And I had to repent. I had to change how I think, and that led to a change of heart, a change of behavior. All right, that leads to what LaVon said about ways that I make deposits in her love bank. Take a listen.
Adam fills my love bank, and the way he blesses me and the things that he does for me that makes me feel loved are taking time for me, putting his phone away. I mean, that is one of my pet peeves, is that he's always on his phone or texting or on social media or whatever it is, and to be able to have him voluntarily, rather than me saying, put your phone away, and voluntarily putting the phone away and just spending time with me. I think that is one of the things that fills my love bank and makes me feel loved and cherished. One thing that he does really well, I'm not sure that it was really my love language, but I do enjoy it now and feel loved, is many times he'll buy unexpected things at unexpected times. It doesn't have to be anything big or anything fancy. He may come home with some flowers for no reason, or just a little something that makes me feel loved, and I really appreciate that. I really appreciate it when he picks stuff up after himself, but that doesn't happen very often. So, well, the ways that I try to bless Adam and fill his love bank are, first of all, trying to know his love languages, and his love language are words of affirmation and touch, and those two actually do not come naturally to me. I'm not a big talker. I'm not a big toucher. Never have been. So those those two take a lot of effort for me to give to him, but I try to be intentional about that. And just holding his hand while we're driving or rubbing his back or whatever, I know that really means a lot to him.
Well, Levon and I both are really trying to be intentional over the years at speaking each other's love languages. So 15 years ago, I was preaching the same series. I do this every 5 years. And 15 years ago, Levon said to me, you know what? I'd really like to learn to dance. And I'm like, yeah, not me. I can't clap to the beat of the music. I mean, I'm a klutz. And every time we would dance, I felt like I felt embarrassed. I felt awkward. I felt like just totally self-conscious. It filled me with dread, the thought of dancing. She wanted to take dancing lessons. Part of me wanted to say, well, go take them, go ahead and have fun. But then I was preaching a series of sermons, and I was preaching this particular sermon on, you have to understand the other person's love language, and what are you going to do that you don't want to do that you want to do because it's going to be a blessing for them. And so I said, okay, let's take dance lessons. I will tell you, every single dance lesson we took, I dreaded it. I mean, I'm not kidding. I felt such dread every time we went to a dance lesson. And I felt like a klutz, and I never could quite get it right. But, after a while, we kind of learned a rhythm. And when we were done with the dance lessons, we went out dancing one night. I think it was at a wedding reception, and we're out there having fun. And as long as she wasn't trying to lead, if she would let me lead, and I wouldn't step on her feet, we were having fun. And then I looked in her eyes, and I saw joy in her eyes and on her face. And I thought, man, it's fun to make a deposit in someone's love bank, to give to them and to see joy in their faces, in their eyes. So we've learned to dance, and we like to dance. Here's a picture of, thinking back to the first of the sermon, here's a picture of us doing a little dance move there in the studio. And I got to tell you, I'm no BG, but for those of you who are young and old enough to remember the Bee Gees, I'm no BG, but I will tell you, I really do love to bless Levon and to try to fill up her love bank. I want to invite you to consider this, that the two keys we've learned, one is to remember the mission. The mission is to bless, to care for, to build up. And this particular key is to make more deposits than withdrawals. And if you do that, you're going to begin to find that your love grows deeper and deeper, and you'll find a love that lasts for a lifetime. Let's pray. God, how grateful we are that you created us with the capacity both to love and to receive love. You made us to need love, to be loved by friends and family members, to receive your love, but at the same time, for many of us, there's a need for a companionship, a helper that comes alongside us. We confess to you that there are many times that we have not made deposits but withdrawals. We have hurt the people that you entrusted to us, the people closest to us and dearest to us, our family members, our friends. But in particular, for those who are married or dating or have been married, there are times that others have hurt us and we've hurt them. Please forgive us. Please help us to pay attention. Help us to remember the mission. Help us to do unto others as they need us to do to them. Help us to love our neighbor as they need us to love them. And help us not to be proud or arrogant, but to consider the needs of others before our own. Help us, O God, to make deposits in one another's love banks, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for watching this week's sermon. We'd love for you to join us again online or live in worship. To learn more about Church of the Resurrection, please visit core.org. Have a great week.